AMD are set to take the crown for the fastest gaming processor in the world when the 9800X3D launches, at least if all of the leaks over the past couple of weeks have been accurate. But while the 9800X3D is going to be the processor that most gamers are interested in, we will of course see the higher core count variants, such as the 16-core CPU, going to release a couple of months after. But despite all of the leaks, the 9800X3D still has several secrets that it needs to give up before its release early next month. So we're going to be talking about some very impressive performance numbers as well as some specification updates, but also throwing in some quite frankly disappointing news concerning the RTX 50 mobile parts. That's right after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So we'll begin with an update to the VCache technology, which of course is, well, kind of critical for the X3D parts as a whole. Now there have been a lot of rumors that AMD will be making some big changes, and AMD themselves in an official kind of trailer that was on X a couple of days ago actually hinted that X3D was reimagined, although of course there was no clarification as to what that meant. It could pretty much mean anything, right? And there were a lot of rumors, especially early on, that there would be perhaps additional stacks of VCache, especially for certain models like the higher core count variant. Maybe the VCache would be of a higher capacity, lots of different stuff, but well, this is perhaps interesting in its own right. So on the 26th of October, so a couple of days ago, there was a tweet from HXL or 9550 Pro on Twitter that basically hinted that we would see the changes basically on how the processor was packaged. So on the 5000 as well as the 7000 X3D processors, the VCache would be on top, but with the 9000 series, it was at least hinted that this was no longer going to be the case and it was going to be beneath. Well, now there is actually an image which does seem to illustrate that this is the case. You can see a rather nice example of this on WCCF Tech. Of course, I'll leave a link in the video description. And here you can see an image that of a 7000 series processor with the VCache stack being clearly visible on the CCD. So basically, different angles, you can kind of see it being visible. Now, if you compare this image to a delidded 9800X3D, that isn't the case anymore. Now, admittedly, you know, this image could be fake or what have you, but I think it's very unlikely. So I think this is a really good point that most likely AMD are going to be doing this, and this is possibly one of the reasons that the processors are clocking at higher speeds and all of that stuff that we've been hearing about. And actually, speaking of the specifications, there is a website, Gizholz, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, .eu. And yes, it's possible that some of these specs could be, well, inaccurate, but I think it's quite likely that they are probably pretty correct. Basically speaking, there's no real surprises here. The amount of cache is pretty consistent with what we have heard previously, and it also states, of course, that the clock frequency is actually identical to the marketing materials which videocards.com recently leaked. You will also see, and this is pretty important, that free multiplier is yes. So potentially we will see some overclocking which will be available, which of course wasn't the case with the previous 3D VCache. So maybe that's another reason that AMD adjusted the stacking once again of the VCache. Now remember, we have actually seen some leaks where this processor has hit 5.6 gigahertz. At the end of the day, these processors are still going to be pretty toasty. I'll be very curious to see what the VCache temperatures are like, since again it's now essentially being squished down below the CPU, which of course isn't exactly ideal for cooling, but whatever. So 5.6 gigahertz has been hit, but whether that's from PBO, Precision Boost Overdrive, or some other type of cooling regarding, you know, the fact that these CPUs are allegedly unlocked, I don't know. But it's going to be very interesting to see exactly what these things are capable of, especially if you start to do, let's say, more exotic cooling. But before we leave the subject of the 9800X3D behind, I do want to go ahead and give you guys a couple of additional benchmarks. So here we can see, and once again, I'm going to give credit, to HXL. They managed to spot on blender.org's benchmark database a 9800X3D. Now, so far, there's only one of these benchmarks, at least of the time I'm recording this. But you can see the median score here. Basically, I'm just going to round up and down the scores for everyone's sanity, mostly mine, around 324 points. To put that into some level of context, it's essentially, I would say, beating CPUs such as the, well, I guess a good comparison would be the 9700X, and it's beating it by a pretty good margin. That's scoring around 291 points. So I'm sure we can agree that that is a pretty big improvement. Of course, when it comes to these benchmarks, there's a lot of different stuff which goes into them, not least of which memory timings and other bits and pieces. But still, it's quite interesting to see. Fortunately, we have more processor benchmarks, which is good. One has been spotted again on WCCF Tech. I'm going to again just round up and down the scores for my sanity. So we're looking at 3040 for the single core score, and the multi-core score, for God's sake, that is so difficult to say, 18,658, I'll be precise in this particular case. WCCF Tech have managed to snag a nice comparison point of all the different benchmarks. Roughly speaking, in terms of single core, it's essentially identical to other Ryzen, Zen 5 processors. So, for example, the 9950X and it are basically neck and neck, but the 285K does have a small advantage, around 100 points or so. Multi-thread performance is a little bit different. Now, again, just to sound like a broken record for a second, obviously there is a lot of stuff which goes into making a benchmark, but in this particular case, if we look at this benchmark here, we actually have an update versus the previous 9800X3D that we had. There's obviously difference in configuration and AGISA versions and that type of stuff, but again, we're looking at 18,660 points for the multi-core score. And if we compare that against the vanilla 8-core variant, which of course is the 9700, there's just over 2,000 points which separates them. And again, do remember that videocards.com did release that marketing material for the 9800X3D recently, and so the results that we're seeing here are pretty much in line with that. And now, I want to finish the video off with something concerning RTX 50 laptops. Now, I do think most of you guys are interested primarily in desktops. I'm actually curious, if you are a laptop gamer mostly, let me know in the comments below. Personally, I do have a laptop, but it's not really primarily for gaming. It's just something it's okay. Like, it was pretty nice when I went to a friend's house earlier in the year. We were playing, oh goodness, what was it? Resident Evil 2 remake together. He was on like his PlayStation, I was on that, and we also played Resident Evil, I think it was Resident Evil 1, I was going to say Code Veronica, but Resident Evil 1 remake, which was really fun as well. But mostly, to be honest, I'm more of a desktop guy. But yeah, maybe some of you guys feel differently, and I know also it's not just laptops for gaming. Obviously you can do a crap ton of other things, but I'm getting off the topic a little bit. So obviously when it comes to laptops, there is a lot of work that goes into producing them. With a desktop, it's a little bit easier in many ways, because while companies do have to worry about things like heat or whatever, it isn't quite as challenging. But with laptops, a lot of stuff has to kind of go into it, and obviously you're oftentimes having to manufacture everything on the same board. It basically can just be a real pain in the ass. But AMD basically released, of course, the Ryzen 8000 series at CES, which was essentially a refresh of Zen 5. AMD is expected to release the AI 300 series and the Strix Point Halo APUs, but those are basically going to act as replacement desktop. Basically, there's just a lot of weirdness. Next year, so in the first quarter of next year, there's a rumor, or basically Intel has essentially confirmed, that we're going to see the Core Ultra 200H and HX series launch, which, as the name would imply, is based on Arrow Lake. But yeah, it's kind of weird just in terms of laptops. Now, if we look at a Golden Pig upgrade pack, they are on Weibo, and they've had a really good track record. According to this, it's predicted that the notebook platform combination next year will mainly N1 or even N2 generation CPU plus 50 series. If Intel wants to stop the 13th generation HX, then a 1465HX plus 50 series will be the main force. AMD has Zen 5 plus 50 series. It's becoming more difficult to launch new CPU products economically. The desktop CPU production position should be readjusted in the future. At least the desktop U should be the last generation, but that will be in 2027, end quote. I initially spotted this story on videocards.com, so I'll also give them credit. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting, to be honest with you guys, to see what happens with the x86 situation on mobile. Maybe I'll talk about this more in the future. But I think we can all agree that there's just a lot of really interesting stuff. Like, one thing I didn't obviously discuss quite recently is the fact that Qualcomm, and ARM, I somehow managed to conjoin the two into one word. They're basically, at it again with the whole ARM situation where they're trying to pull the license from Qualcomm. So obviously there's that. The fact that x86, at least in mobile, it seems to be like a really weird story where ARM is certainly being pushed for Windows, and obviously it's just going to be a very interesting situation over the next couple of years, what happens to the x86 ecosystem, at least in the mobile form factor. But I think that's just about it for this particular video, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Apologies for not being on camera for this one, but it's just been one of those days with stuff that's happening. But I hopefully will be back to normal the next day or so. With that said, take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.